It's that time again for another Q&A video, this one for November 2022. And this month, our Q&A was really interesting. For folks that are new to this, I post a call for questions around the 20th of each month. You have 5 or 6 days to submit your questions, AMAs, and then they end up here on this video. So the cool thing about this month is everything that happened on Patreon and everything that I got through email and folks sending direct messages was all about the same topic. So I guess we're going to get into a little bit of a mini class today, but it's really going to be guided by your questions. So it's a big topic, and the topic surrounds offerings. And I think that it makes a lot of sense that this came up in November. A lot of people are thinking about reciprocity. Folks that are in the States celebrate Thanksgiving, which is supposed to be a time of, gratitude and acknowledging your blessings and all of that. So I think 'tis the season, right? So it kind of makes sense to me that it came up, and lots of folks are thinking about it. So this month, instead of breaking this presentation down into a bunch of different questions, I'm going to kind of just give you an overview of all the questions that I got right now, and then I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. Again, just my perspective, just what I do. You all might come up with other things. If so, I would love to hear them. Please post them and share them so that all of us can learn from one another's experiences. So the questions all surrounding offerings. We got some questions about offerings and ecology. Looking at traditional or suggested offerings for different deities or spirits or plants or animals, and what to do when those offerings are not ecologically sound, that they don't biodegrade, or that their harvesting or manufacturing practices are not in line with what you want to do, or that the substance itself could be harmful or toxic to the soil or the mycelium or little critters that might stumble across and eat it. So really beautiful questions, because this shows that folks are thinking about relationships. We're thinking about how everything we do creates a tertiary function. Everything that we do creates that next branch on the world tree. Everything we do nudges the universe further and further into states of disharmony or harmony, chaos or cosmos. So this, of course, makes me very happy. So I appreciate all of the questions, very, very well thought out. Some of the other questions got into sustainability and animism, looking at our seasonal practices, some of the things that we do around this time of year, and how to make those celebrations, those rituals, those offerings more sustainable. This gets a little bit out of the offerings topic, but I think we can wrap it all together in a beautiful way because it's all pretty related. And really just exploring how to give physical gift, how to make offerings in a way that is not just based on tradition, not just based on lore, but is also intentionally and directly sustaining of place, right? Which I think is a really beautiful concept, that what we do isn't just okay, but actually adds to the harmony of a place, the well-being of a place. So let's get into it. Offerings. So Sharon brought up a lot of really specific offerings that we could consider traditional, offerings that we see in the lore, that we see in different mythologies, that different pagan and neo-pagan and earth-based and animistic traditions teach as part of their tradition to offer this. But there's no doubt that some of those, with the understanding that we have now in 2022, maybe have a reach that's a little different than we expected, So first, I want to preface this by saying that nature is tough, and animals are smart, and insects are smart, bacterium are smart, mycelium are smart. they all contain a depth of wisdom within them. So one of the things that came up in a question was specifically about making offerings of tobacco, which I assume would be like a cured and dried tobacco offering, but that tobacco, the nicotinamides and all of that, can be very hazardous to some plants, can be very toxic to some animals. Here's the thing. Nicotinamide-rich plants in the nightshade family specifically, they grow in the wild. There are nightshades everywhere, pretty much all over the planet, I think. And there is a knowing in animals when they can and cannot eat certain things. Oftentimes a bug will take a bite of something and go, okay, that's not for me, right? Similarly, humans, we can take bites of things sometimes, and that bitter alkaloid will sometimes trigger in our brain like, oh, this is probably poisonous. I probably shouldn't eat more of this, or other things. So it's not to say that it's an excuse to do whatever you want and the animals can fend for themselves, but that, when it comes to small little offerings of plant-based, organic, biodegradable, compostable material, you don't have to worry so much about the details. Like if you were to put a pinch of tobacco, A, it's not very much, B, it's going to break down very quickly, and C, most animals and insects just smelling nightshades or getting a little taste will go, that's not for me. That's not something that I want to engage in. And so we have to trust, that there is wisdom. As much as we have wisdom, they also have wisdom, and that we can trust that they know what they're doing. Because we could have the same conversation about making an offering of dried tomato leaves in a garden, right? Harvesting those fragrant tomato leaves. I know not everybody loves the smell of tomato leaves. I do. Harvesting those and making an offering of them, that they are also incredibly rich as a nightshade and nicotinamides. And teas can even be made from tomato leaves and sprayed on other plants to kill animals. But again, tiny little amounts as an offering, I think we're generally okay. So try to remove some of the fear, try to remove some of the, and try to remember that the animals and the insects and all the other critters and beings have wisdom too, and they tend to know some things. That being said, there are definitely things that I see people use as offerings all the time that I'm not into, okay? One of the big ones is essential oils. Pouring essential oils directly on the soil, or baked into offering cakes or whatever, to me, it's a little too strong. It's a concentrated amount of plant material that you will not find naturally occurring in the world. Nowhere in nature will you encounter a drop of oil coming out of a plant that is that potent, right? This requires pounds and pounds and pounds, sometimes hundreds of pounds of plant material to create one drop. It's incredibly strong, and I just don't think that it's appropriate. If you wanted to diffuse some essential oils in a space as an offering to the spirits of place or your hearth gods, I think that's fine. It's a more controlled environment. You're putting it in the air. But to put it directly on the soil, not something I'm into. Obviously, anything plastic, anything that can knot up that animals could get stuck in if they were investigating it. I'm very cautious about making sure I'm not putting things that have rings, anything that animals can get stuck in. Again, they're very smart. The function of whiskers in most mammals is to figure out how, what type of a space they can fit through. But we put these things out that they get curious about, and they wouldn't normally encounter knots and things. So I try to be mindful. Sharon brought up alcohol, whiskey, vodka, gin being poured directly on the soil. Of course, high concentrations of alcohol can be sterilizing to soil, kill mycelium, kill bacteria, potentially kill critters. So this, I think, is why even the ancients poured their libations onto stone. They generally had stones that would sometimes have cups carved into them, or a flat stone, or an altar dedicated to a deity or a spirit or a sacred place. And the offerings were generally the libations were poured onto the stone so that it would evaporate. Whether that was just a sign of respect, or they had an understanding that when they had these places where, you know, libations of wine were being poured all the time, and suddenly they saw all the plant life die, and they put two and two together, I don't know. But that is my preferred way to do it. I actually salvaged a pine, a bit of, you know, kind of a chunk of a pine tree. They had cut a pine tree up after a windstorm. The tree fell, and they come through and cut it up into chunks. And I took one and put it in my backyard and routed out kind of a dish shape in it. And now I just make all of my libations into that. Some of it does run down the side into the soil, but it's negligible. 95% of it stays in that bowl and either kind of seeps into that wood or evaporates. So that could be something, if you've got a place outside where you could put a stone bowl or something that could be, you know, leave out all year long, could brave the weather, the rain, the sun, everything, and just pour your libations into that and let it evaporate. Again, you know, I would still favor putting a stone or something in the middle so that if bees get into it, they don't drown, or if animals crawl in and they can't crawl out, they've got something in the middle they can use to get out. This is why I just love a flat surface, a stone, something, keep it easy. We see the ancestral traditions do that all the time. So I like the idea of thinking 10 steps ahead. You know, if Sharon also brought up apples. You know, if I leave this apple here, you know, the squirrels are going to nip at it, and some birds and some worms, and then it's going to be the core, and then it's going to be the seeds, and then what? You know, again, don't stress too much about it. Apples drop fruit and drop seeds all the time, and the animals know how to navigate the toxicity of those seeds. Same with apricots and stuff, where there's, you know, some chemicals in some of those seeds that are pretty rough, but the land knows how to deal with it. So that brings me to another point that, you know, if we're leaving fruit offerings, it's a good idea to work with plants that the land does know how to work with. If you're bringing apples to a place where apples don't grow, it's like, you know, introducing food into your body when you may not have the bacterial presence to digest that food. It may cause a hiccup. And I remember somebody telling a story of some cave entrance in Ireland somewhere, and, you know, going up one or two times a week and having to clean up all of this rotting fruit material, because everybody would come bring, you know, apples and flowers and just kind of leave them in this space where it's stone. And so as the fruits didn't compost and critters didn't carry it off, it just kind of rotted, which attracted fruit flies and, you know, bats and all kinds of stuff. So think 10 steps ahead. Do the meditation where you sit and like follow it, you know, kind of as far down its life cycle as you can think. I'm very fortunate in the city that I live in, and I do live in a city. I live in the middle of a city. We have brown bins here, which are compost. And so the city picks those up. They take them out to a composting facility, which is landfill adjacent, and they create compost, which you can then buy from them in the spring. And it's made from food waste, which is really cool. So one thing you could do is, with those apples and things, you could leave them out overnight. Let the powers that be take the essence, take the offering, and then the next day go pick them up and throw them in the brown bin, and now it's controlled. You know, or if it's fruit or flowers or whatever, you could consider burying them. So you're getting them out of the world of rot and into the world of compost, right? So there are lots of options here. Really good questions. Thank you. And again, always happy to see this kind of stuff because it shows me that folks are thinking about relationships. Pip was asking about sustainability, which I thought was really interesting. Thinking in terms of like the sheer number of Christmas trees that we grow just to chop down, keep in our house for a month and then throw away. They go back to the landfill, or where I lived, sometimes they just sit out in the parking strips for 2 months before somebody else deals with it, right? Not the only example, but these celebrations that we do that involve materials from nature, even if they're coming off of a tree farm. And I hope people are not wildcrafting their pine trees for Christmas. Please don't do that. Go to a tree farm. How can we make that less impactful? I think the answer is sustainability. Here in my herb shop, we have a Christmas tree. We have a holiday tree, a Yule tree. It's fake. I bought it one time. It'll last longer than I'm alive. So to me, that was the sustainability answer. Yes, it's made out of plastic and metal and whatever else, but I bought it one time, and we fluff it up, and then we fluff it down and put it in a box and put it away, and it's there next year, and we don't buy trees and we don't have to water them and all that stuff. So one thing I like the idea of is considering with these different traditions that we have, what grows where you are that's resonant to the deeper spirit of the lore. Not taking things literally, but trying, not taking the lore by the letter, but by the spirit of it. So maybe you don't have pumpkins that grow where you are, and you have turnips, and then you get to do this cool thing where you go back to the origin of carving pumpkins and you get to carve turnips instead. And that's a huge issue where I live, is that pumpkins are very draining and exhausting to the soil, and they're very hybridized to make the seeds not be there, and very GMO, and people buy them and they carve them and they put them out for a few nights, and then they end up in the garbage can, right? And it's just so wasteful. So that could be working with, squashes and pumpkins and stuff, that you can take as much of that as possible and cook with it, make some treats with it, or just choosing a different vegetable altogether. Use or work with what's locally relevant to what you're doing, I think, is always the answer. See what the land around you has to celebrate with. Imagine that the world you live in, that the land you're on, is also celebrating Yuletide with you. Which plants are they celebrating with? Who is showing up to that festivity, and bring that in. We can always use divination and such to commune with the spirits to see if there's a good fit or if there's some guidance there. But generally, I think if we make things local, it's better. We're honoring the spirits of place. We're honoring the land itself and the many desires that the land itself has as Earth Mother. So there's nothing wrong with doing new versions of old things. And as somebody who is very strongly adheres to what I consider a neo-pagan path, this is part of my journey, right? I'm not an ancient pagan. I don't even live on Celtic lands, right? I'm in America. But I'm not an ancient pagan. I'm not 6,000 years ago. Some of the things suggested in lore are totally impractical for where I am. Some of them would be illegal or dangerous where I am, and some of them are prohibitively expensive, where I am. I don't have the trees to do the things that the lore talks about where I live. So I like the idea of trying to, again, get the deeper spirit of the lore, what's being said, what's being coaxed out of us, and then figure out how to do it in a way that speaks to where, when, and who you are. Our traditions are syncretic and animistic. They are supposed to evolve. They are supposed to adapt to time and place. That is how they stay fresh and relevant. That is how we avoid brittleness and dogma and all of that stuff, is that pagan traditions are supposed to be able to plug and play wherever they are, wherever they land, right? Syncretism is part of animism. So allow yourself to be syncretic with your practices. It's a lot of fun. B, it initiates us into how to work with inspiration. And C, it's more ecological, more sustainable, which is good for everybody. I love the idea of taking these, whether you're following the Eightfold, neo-pagan Wheel of the Year, or a Christian-inspired Wheel of the Year, whatever, looking around and saying, if all the beings of place were celebrating with me right now, how would they be celebrating? Something that comes to mind before I wrap up is planning an Imbolc breeds cross-making class and realizing we don't have the plant material that would normally be used to weave those really beautiful, intricate breeds crosses, right? We don't have that here. We could probably grow it. It would take a lot of TLC and a lot of watering, which we, as in being in the high desert, we try to be careful. So having that dialogue about, okay, what plants do we have that have similar fibers that are tough, that we can soak and make pliable and then weave into a breeds cross and then dry, and they'll look super cool and they'll last for a whole year. Like, that's the work. That's devotional work, right? Is figuring out which plants here where I am could participate in our celebration of Imbolc in the same way that the traditional plants of Ireland will be harvested to participate in the rites of Imbolc. So I think it's fun. I love a challenge, and it's a really good way to get out and meet new plants and figure out who you can work with in your practices. So hopefully that gives you some guidance. Again, just from my perspective, use the comments below if you've got other ideas or things you've encountered that haven't felt right and what you've done to work around them or change them. Let's continue this dialogue. It's very important. Offerings, the giving of gifts, is very, very important to our work with all the spirits, all of our spiritual kindred. So this is a topic we should dig into and cover over and over again forever as we continue to evolve and do whatever we're doing. So thank you again all so much. If you want to get in on next month's Q&A, join us over on Patreon. The Q&A call goes up on the 20th, and then you get your answers right here in the form of a video. Until next time, take care, everyone. I'll see you.